y'all? What's going on? Welcome to Love in Dark Places. I just have something really important to share. Hey, bro, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? I'm really excited for her. I about wasted 10 seconds on this. It was on sale at Target. Yeah, y'all really don't know what this episode is about just yet, but it was on sale at Target, 25% off. Shout out to Dania and her coupons. But it was a pick me up because last episode I released was on my mom, and that was fairly heavy. Thank you again so much, everyone who sent me messages, who watched and listened, left comments on the video. It's been truly just wow, just such an honor to be able to share her story. But not only that, I've just been so encouraged to even see how my mom's spirit is living in the stories, the victories, just the impact that I've already received from people just sharing their takeaways from the video and our relationship. And so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I thank you, but I told y'all at the end of the video, I needed to recover, and my recovery were these slippers. So I'm still recovering, which kind of brings me to today's episode, which is on grief. Yay! Sorry. I wish it could get lighter, you know what I'm saying? But this is Love in Dark Places, so this is where we at. We at dark places with Hey Boo slippers on. But yes, I felt it was just a natural segue to talk about this, but also even just, I like to show up on camera and on this podcast authentic and meeting y'all where I'm at and inviting y'all to sit with me where I'm at. And recently, probably 12 hours ago, I discovered that I am grieving. And grief is a very interesting emotion, and it's a very interesting experience because it can often show up as a subcurrent of all of the other things that are going on in your life and all of the other emotions that you're experiencing at the time. And so sometimes it can be really hard to identify that you're actually grieving. And that was the case with me since Friday, which was the second birthday without my mom here on planet Earth with us. And it was a really beautiful, a really amazing, a really awesome celebration. We even sang her happy birthday and blew out a candle and ate cake in her honor, which was really great. And I walked away from that day feeling really grateful to have celebrated her memory, to have felt like, I can still live out those moments and times and make new memories even after her great migration. But at the same time, I was speaking to my facilitators in my codependency recovery group yesterday about it. And I was like, yeah, I've just been feeling really irritated and angry, and Monday was really terrible, and I just was in the worst headspace. And they walked me back and they said, what happened on Friday? And I was like, I celebrated my mom's birthday. And they were like, right. You walked through another grief anniversary. And that is difficult. And even though our minds may register that we're okay and we're resolved and we got enough to make the next step and go to the next move, our bodies may not be on the same page just yet. I think there's this great book that I've not yet to read called Your Body Keeps the Score. And I feel like that's what's been happening. One of the phrases that I've been using to explain how I've been feeling these past, 4 or 5 days has been disconnected. I just feel disconnected with my body, my environment, what's going on around me, and then my brain just feels on a different page. And sometimes grief can feel that way. And so I just wanted to open this space because, one, I think it's the natural segue after speaking about my mom's passing, but also because this is where I'm at, and also because this is the place where a lot of us struggle to be at. Grief, though necessary, is not an easy place to sit in. It is very difficult for the human psyche to just marinate in pain. It's not our activity of choice. And sometimes grief can feel that way. And I also want to expand the categories of grief as well. I know that I'm coming from a place of loss as it relates to my mom, and not just my mom, but the reminder that I also lost my grandmothers this past summer. And that's definitely one aspect of grief, but grief can show up not just in the people we lose, but in the things we lose, in the places we lose. I mean, I'm a military brat. My dad was in the military for 20 years, and I have had to move spaces and places every 4 to 5 years. And each time there was a pain and a gravity with those decisions and those transitions. And there was a lot of loss. Even coming into ministry, I had to reconcile with the fact that even though I chose to leave my previous job as a U.S. diplomat, there was a lot of grief that came with that. I felt like, to a certain extent, I was losing a lot of the relationships and friendships that I had established, the lifestyle that I got to live as a U.S. diplomat. You know, even the blueprint of becoming an ambassador and those future dreams of, you know, leveling up in the career in the State Department, those all dissipated. And for about, 2 to 3 months in transitioning into ministry here, into a new state, a new relationship, a new town, a new job, all of that was also holding space and wrestling with the losses that I felt. Even though I felt like I, couldn't really grieve those losses because I signed up for it, right? I chose to leave that job. And so there was even that moment where I was like, am I allowed to grieve this? Because I said yes, I paid the cost, if you will, to, cut ties and send my resignation letter and, book the U-Haul and come to New Jersey. If it's my decision, then do I have the right to grieve that? Wow. And logically and mentally, it was all telling me, no, you don't. But my body was telling me something different. My emotions were communicating something different. And that I needed to accept the fact that even though I am stepping into this new adventure and I'm taking a leap of faith into what I believe is God's calling on my life, I still have permission to grieve. I still have permission to feel the pain for the loss of what could have been. Or even what I thought was the path and the route for me, and it turned out it wasn't. That I could grieve those things. And, I just want to park here before I go and talk about how I have spent, especially this last year, but even more specifically, right after my grandmother's passed, just really dedicating spaces for me to grieve. I want to talk about why it's important, why we make those spaces. Because I think there is a culture still. I do believe we've made progress in a lot of ways, especially with mental health awareness and just speaking about these things, and even more platforms talking about more openly the importance of grieving. But there's still this culture of just bury your head in the sand, do what you have to do to get by, and just go on with your life and survive. Because to deal with the pain, it's too painful, it's too much, or you're making too big of a deal out of it. Everybody dies. Everybody loses their job. Everybody loses friendship. So you're just making it worse for yourself if you try and sit in this pain, or if you let yourself be overwhelmed by this, right? There's this kind of narrative almost that comes in when the pain shows up of I'm not allowed to feel this pain, or it's not good for me to feel this pain. And we never actually get to the point of saying in full honesty and humility, I don't know how to feel this pain. And that's really important, because I've realized with all the losses that I've experienced over my lifetime that grief is like the friend and the voice we need to hear that says, what happened to you shouldn't have happened to you. Or the pain you feel, it makes sense why it hurts, right? It's the friend that comes and sits with you and says, I'm so sorry for your loss. I am so sorry you were going through this pain. It's the friend that says, I know this was so important to you. I know they were so important to you. And it breaks my heart to see you in this pain. And it helps us to orient ourselves to a new normal. Because when we lose something we love, whether it's a person, a job, or a location, or anything really, our lives either go on pause or they just feel completely altered, like something's off. And the pain helps us to recognize that and to acknowledge that. And so when we push past the grief, or when we try to silence it or mute it instead of process it, instead of being able to sit with it and show compassion to ourselves, instead what we do is we emotionally neglect ourselves. We end up being that emotional, neglectful parent or figure that says, yeah, this happens to everybody, get over it. Like, well, you've got responsibilities. I know you're sad right now, but you can't cry over spilled milk, right? Move on, you're strong enough. Let's do what we need to do, right? It's this underlying message of we should see trauma, we should see loss, and we should see just pain and destruction as something normal, that it's okay. You know, and for those of us who've gone through therapy, or those of us who have experienced any level of trauma or dysfunction in our upbringing, and we've gone through this healing journey, we know how long it has taken us to look back on what has happened in our life and say, oh, that wasn't okay. That wasn't right. That shouldn't have happened. Or we meet someone who grew up in more of a functional home, or didn't have the traumatic experience that we had, and we share our experience with them, and they're in this like shock moment, like, oh snap, and we're like, wait, that's not normal? That's not, wait, that doesn't like happen to everybody? And they're like, you know, my therapist, I remember, we love Kathleen. Shout out to Kathleen. I should send her these episodes. Am I allowed to do that? Does that break the fiduciary. Anyway, I don't think so. But, you know, she sat me down. That's not what she did. We were meeting virtually on a telehealth call. And, you know, she was just getting to know my timeline. And she said, hey, just walk me through the traumatic events that have happened in your life. And I was like, oh, can you give me examples of what trauma is? And she's like, oh, you know, like a divorce or a death in the family. And this was back in 2021. You know, maybe it was a car accident or something. And I was like, oh, no, I don't think I had any of that happen. I don't know if I've had any trauma. She's like, okay, that's fine. Just kind of walk me through some painful events that happened to you. And I began to share some things that happened to me. Maybe I'll share them on future episodes, but it's going to take away from what we're talking about right now. But I began to share some painful things that happened to me. And, you know, it's not a good feeling when you shock your therapist. It doesn't feel great when your therapist is surprised about what you've been through. And she was like, pause. Yeah, this is trauma, honey. This is not good. This should not have happened. And yeah, man, when we allow the emotion of grief to live in our bodies, to live in the moment of pain that we're in, it helps us, although it doesn't feel like it maybe because of all the discomfort we feel, it helps us to acknowledge that something's wrong here. Something is missing where it shouldn't have been. And I feel like I want to read just 2 quotes before I go into, you know, how I came to really take ownership of this, especially after my mom's suicide, where I was like, yeah, this is not something I can treat as normal. Right. This is not something I can treat as, oh, this shouldn't affect me, or I just need to get on with my life. No, there's a lot here. And so I just want to share, there's these 2 examples. I hope this is flowing. You know me. I'm doing the best I can with what I got. But there are these 2 books that I've been reading. One is a part of my codependency recovery. I've been putting it off, so we still on like page 40 and there's like 200 pages. But anyway, this is called Running on Empty, and it is by Jonice Webb. I hope I pronounced her name right. Dr. Jonice Webb. She worked for that PhD. Dr. Jonice Webb. And she speaks about these different cases of emotional neglect that children experience and how it can show up later in people's life. And so one of the examples that she gives is about, one of her clients who she lost her father at a really young age, but her mother, who wasn't equipped with how to communicate that or navigate that, just kind of moved on with their lives as if the father didn't exist. And so this is what was said. She said, when I first met Sally, her client, at the age of 40, she was single, never married. She was a successful biotech engineer with a house of her own, a dog, and a passion for Sudoku puzzles. But Sally came to therapy because she wasn't happy. She said, I haven't been happy since I was 8 years old, around the time her father passed from cancer. Although she functioned just fine and had made a place for herself in the world, for 32 years she had struggled with a sadness that she couldn't shake and an empty feeling that she couldn't escape. Sally once told me, other people live in a different world from me. They see colors, feel things, love each other, and get excited. I have none of that. To me, the world is gray. I'm on the outside looking in. Sally was right. She really was living in a gray world. She was running on a half-empty tank of low-octane fuel that had been diluted by a pool of unshed tears. Here are some of the feelings that Sally had been holding inside all those 22, 23 years. shock over her father's sudden disappearance from her life, grief over the loss of him, anger that she hadn't been told that her father was going to die, fear of talking about anything feeling related because it might hurt another person, loss of the feeling of being special as she never again felt like she was anyone's favorite, fear of becoming attached again since from her experience, attachment is disastrously painful, anger at her family and herself for pretending that her father had never existed before his death, guilt that she had sometimes wished periodically throughout her life that it had been her mother instead of her father who had died. It's important to note here that Sally's mother was a good woman. She worked hard and did her best despite being overwhelmed. When she learned of her husband's illness and that he was going to die and eventually lost him, she did not have the tools to manage her own grief herself, much less to communicate about it with her children. She went into survival mode and coped with the head down, nose to the grindstone technique. She did the best she could possibly do with the tools she had available to her. Part of Sally's work was to try to understand why and how it all unfolded this way, how it had affected her, and all of the intense feelings she had internalized and buried as a result. So that's Sally's story, which obviously probably isn't her real name, which I respect the confidentiality. So I'm not sharing Sally's. Anyway, let me move on. This is from a book that I've referenced before called As Long as You Need. It's by J.S. Park, a chaplain who works at a Trauma One care facility in Florida for the past, 10 plus years. And this is what he says about grief. Grief, it seems, is not about letting go, but about letting in. What I mean is, the world wants to keep spinning when you suffer loss. Let go, turn the page, move on, they say, or else the loss will consume you. If you're in it right now, you know what I mean. Your world is on fire, and everybody is telling you to cool down. And I'm telling you that the loss will consume you anyway. I'm telling you that when your world stops, you are right to pause there, to honor the whole axis and gravity and orbit of that loss. When the grief is all you have left, it's a cruelty to lose that too. Yeah, man, these are my books. This is my fun reading. Yeah, there's something about when we silence the grief, we cut off a part of ourselves. And not only do we lose the person we lost, or we lose the job, or the relationship, or whatever it is, we also lose ourselves. Mm-hmm. And there are amazing women that I have talked to who have shared these very experiences of feeling like, man, I don't know why I can't be present in my life. I don't know why I can't engage. It seems like so many people can access joy and all of these emotions, and I can't. I don't know what happened. I just feel numb. And then we talk about the trauma that they've been through for the first time. We talk about the loss. And I asked them, what happened? How did people respond around you when this loss struck your family or your household or you? And, for most of them, it happened before the age of 10, which is devastating. And they said, well, everybody kind of shrugged their shoulders. They just kind of moved on. And so I felt like I had to move on too. A silencing again and again. And those parts of us that feel, those parts of us that hurt before we think, sometimes those are the most intrinsic and vital parts of us that we can cut off. And so I wanted to take this time to really open up space to say, if we have all in some ways experienced loss, we've all lost someone we've loved or something that we loved. And we convinced ourselves maybe at one point that we need to move on, that if we stay here, we're never going to grow, life isn't going to get better, or whatever the narrative we were told in our heads or by, unfortunately, some of the other people around us. I wanted to open the space to give us a new narrative. That grief can be the friend that teaches us how to hold the height, width, and depth of love. Anna?
Very good. Very good.
I know sometimes it can feel like a villain. I know it can sometimes feel like the monster under the bed, especially because there's so much I don't know around it. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to feel this. And we don't get a lot of references or models about it. Shout out. His name might be Andrew Garfield. I think his name is Andrew Garfield. He was with Elmo,
Spider-Man?
this brother. Yes. Mm-hmm. Phenomenal in how he's described his journey with grief. Really love what he said and shared about it. So also open the space for a new narrative. You said Spider-Man, and now, come on, baby, let's get back in there. Yes. Right. This is unedited, so I have to find it back, honey. I have to find it. But yes, just wanted to open a space for a new narrative. That grief is the compassionate friend we've been waiting to see us, hear us, and know what we've been through. We've been waiting for that for a lot of us who've gone through some really hard things that we were never supposed to, or who have started some really wonderful things, but lost some things along the way to get to that wonderful. We're still allowed to grieve. And so I know that feels like the end of the episode, but to the part where a lot of us don't know how to grieve, I just wanted to share ways in which I've learned how to grieve and the references that I've come to find. I think a lot of us in the Western culture, our reference for grief is to, show up at the funeral, maybe cry the day of, but then the next day or the next week, you got to be back at work. Yeah. In other cultures, it is not this way. They specifically, and the one that I drew from, was the Jewish culture. And looking at the practice of Shiva, shout out to my best friend Eden and her family for welcoming me into their home and teaching me a lot of their culture and why they practice what they practice and why they celebrate what they celebrate. As a Christian, I feel like they're like my big brother, big sister, helping me walk through who Jesus was from that side of the cultural context. And yes, Shiva is a practice that I learned and it was first really introduced to me with just listening to the Bema podcast and the Rob Bell podcast as well, hence why I'm on a pack, let me stop. But then was even more amplified when I did the Mourner's Kaddish with Eden's dad at their house around my mother's birthday last year, because it was the first birthday that I had ever celebrated without her. And, I decided to do it because my grandmother in Oklahoma passed away on July 2nd, and my grandmother in Connecticut, she passed away on July 14th. And we so wonderfully decided to have both of their celebration of life and funerals in the same week. So my grandmother in Connecticut's her birthday, Jesus, no. Her celebration of life was on Monday, I believe 2 weeks following her passing. And then my mom's anniversary of death, July 24th, was on, I believe, that Wednesday. And then we decided to have my grandmother in Oklahoma's celebration of life in New York on Saturday. So it was a lot. My husband's birthday was on Sunday, the day before the passing of the celebration of life for my grandmother in Connecticut. So it was a lot. It was a lot. And I think in that week, I walked into it knowing there's no way I'm going to be able to process all of the grief that I'm feeling. There's no way I'm going to be able to hold space for everything. At a certain point, I was just angry. Yeah. At a certain point, I was just upset and doing shopping sprees at Five Below because I did not have it. But I knew, with just the things that I've been reading, with God just helping me navigate everything since my mom's passing, that I'm going to need to make space for it. Like, I can't just finish these and then go back to work. That's not going to be possible. I at this point don't know who I am anymore with all of these shifts and turns and earthquakes and hurricanes and storms and tornadoes. I was like, I'm going to need a space of time. And so when I got the news that my grandma in Connecticut had passed, it was on the morning of July 14th, and it was again via phone. I got the text message that she had already passed, and we were about to make our way up to see her, knowing it was her last moment. So I was devastated. I mean, this was only less than 2 weeks after hearing my grandma in Oklahoma passed. I was devastated. And that morning, I felt like God gave me an olive branch and led me to research, how do I mourn? And it brought me back to Shiva, which is this 7-day practice, this 7-day tradition of starting the day of the person's funeral or wake. You go each day of mourning the one that you lost. And usually it's reserved for like an immediate family member, like a parent or sibling, a child or a spouse. And there are certain things you do to your house and your environment, and there are certain things that you don't do so that you can really just sit. Shiva is literally what it's called. You're sitting Shiva. And so all the windows are closed. You're not to have, like all your mirrors are covered because you're not really supposed to be concerned with personal appearance at this time. You are to wear something that's black, and that either you can have a torn piece of cloth or you can tear part of your clothing close to your heart to show that there's been a tear in your heart from this person's passing. And you are also like to sit on a low stool or on the ground to represent that God has humbled you and brought you low with this loss. And then also, I believe you are to light a candle, a Yaritz candle. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, Eden. But a Yaritz candle, you're to light that, and it is to last the full 7 days to represent that though their body has departed this earth, their spirit is still with you. And what's also beautiful about this practice is that it's very community-centered. So although you are kind of going through this really humbling, devastating loss and tragedy, and the environment around you reflects that, this is a moment for the community to just really pour in and surround you with love, comfort, whatever errands you may need, whatever food, the family needs, they bring that, and you kind of have hours, like open house hours where they can just come and sit Shiva. You can share memories with each other, but they have a rule that, which I think is wonderful, that you don't really speak unless the person or family sitting Shiva speaks to you. You may offer some things like, I'm sorry for your loss. If there's anything, let me know, but I'm here. And so I read this and I was like, man, I really feel like my soul, my spirit needs this. My body, my mind, my heart, it needs this, because it just felt like a full collision course over the past year of just starting with the passing and death of my Obachan and grandma in April of last year, to my mom's suicide in July of last year, to my grandma's in Oklahoma's passing, and my grandma in Connecticut's passing, happening July, like 4 months ago at that point, a couple of weeks before. I was like, I've literally lost all my maternal figures in less than 1 year. I have been completely swept clean of all the mothers in my family of that part of our generation. And my aunts and uncles, my dads, they've lost their mothers. This is not something I can just cry at a funeral and be okay. I need my world to look like it's been devastated. I need my world, my environment, to reflect the tragedy that my heart is experiencing. Something is different, and I don't want things around me to look normal. And so that's what I did. I did that for 7 days. I thank God for the church and community that He's given me here, and me and Charles here in Jersey. You know, we put it out to them. You know, we know this is a Jewish practice. We're a Christian church, so we're not trying to force anything on anyone who doesn't have a clear conscience or doesn't feel comfortable doing this. But if you'd like to support, if you'd like to come by, here are the opening hours. You know, if you want to bring a meal by, because I'm not cooking, I'm not doing anything. I'm just really, literally reading Lamentations. And some, I think, sects of Judaism, you're not even to read scripture. But if you do, it's either Job or Lamentations, which is fun. You know?
Wow.
It's great. Like, wow. And so, yeah, we put it out there and we said, hey, this is something I really want to do, but I also know grieving in isolation isn't good for me. I would love to have just a community go through this with me and be there with me as I go through this journey. And that was one of the most healing parts of it, because, you know, we had 4 or 5 people coming almost every day to just sit, to look at pictures, to just drop off a meal, to just pray with me, to laugh with me, to talk about what I'm finding and discovering through scripture. And I felt like, and I haven't always felt like this living in the US, I felt like I wasn't a burden for holding the pain and the loss that I was going through. No one was telling me to speed up. No one was giving me advice or telling me everything happens for a reason and God's got it covered. They were just sitting with me, like Job's friends who mourned with him in the ashes for 7 days, not saying a word. And, you know, I discovered in that time the gift that there is in grieving. There was so much pain, there was so much confusion, there was so much uncertainty, but then there was also so much good and blessing and love that came from it, and clarity that came from it as well.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned from studying out Lamentations and even listening to some podcasts about, I will confess, I did do some online shopping, but I wasn't supposed. Anyway, focus. Ah!
This den is sponsored.
I will. This is. Should I take that? Should I go? Should I stay? Well, just stay on track and even this den, this podcast studio. If you're watching on YouTube, and if you're not and you're listening, I encourage you, especially at this point, for reference, this den that I'm sitting in. This came from grief. I had a completely different idea of what I wanted to do with this space. But I was going through so much loss and I didn't know how to handle it that I was like, I just need to have things around me that bring me joy. They don't need to have any other purpose than they either make me laugh or smile. And my wonderful husband said, here, you can make this room whatever you want it. And you literally see, like, there's no reason for this. There's no reason. But does it not make you laugh? Exhibit A, And I just started putting all these pieces together and, going crazy on the sales that just happened to be happening at the right time. Thank you, God. And when it was all said and done, someone came over and was like, this is the perfect space for you to do your podcast. And I was like, what? What? My dopamine den? What? And the grief gave me this gift, And yeah, so as I was like studying out Lamentations and even looking at Psalm 22 and relating myself to the pain and the tragedy and the loss of so many stories in the Bible. And I felt comforted by that God saw each and every one of them through that. But also to learn that when we look at these passages in the Bible, when we look at Lamentations and Psalm 22, what's interesting is that the griever, the person who's lamenting, a lot of the verses are not focused on God do this for me, God help me, God get me out of this, God do this. It's really about the person who's lamenting, expressing their pain, grief, making analogies for it, like showing how terrible, how crushing it is, how it's pulverizing their very spirit. Like they are making it very explicit with God about how they feel. And it's crazy because I think in my head I was like, well, God knows how I feel. I don't need to tell him that. I need to tell him what he needs to do. Okay, bring my mom back to life. Okay, press rewind on this past year. But for some reason, the biblical authors express grief as pain and not as a to-do list for God. They wanted God to see them in what they're going through. Even if God is all-seeing and all-knowing, it's almost like the biblical authors felt like the most important thing God wants for us when we're grieving is to know that he sees us. Is to know that he hears us, is to know that his heart is breaking too. And one of the analogies that I was discussing with my husband, I was like, it's like a little child who has a favorite stuffed animal. Has a favorite stuffed animal, and that stuffed animal helps them go to sleep every night. And all of a sudden, they cannot find where the stuffed animal is. They've misplaced it. And they're freaking out, they're crying, they're distraught. And the parent has one or two choices. The parent can be like, it's fine, honey, like I'll just buy you a new one. It's okay. Like you don't have to freak out about this. Like we'll just find a new one. But I think the parent that says, I'm so sorry, honey, this is really hard. This is really hard to lose something that you really care about and that you love. And I'm with you, I will hold you, and we'll figure out what to do. But I'm here with you because this is hard and I know you loved your stuffed animal. And even though if that parent knows that they could fix it, that they could take it away, It doesn't take from what the pain that child is feeling at that moment. And I felt like that's what God was showing me through that week of Shiva. He was like, I can't give your mom back to you. I can't rewind the clock on your grandmothers to give you more time. But what I can do is let you know that I'm hurting too. And that this breaks my heart. The brokenness of this breaks my heart. To see you in this much pain breaks my heart. And I will sit with you for as long as you need. Yeah. And that's what I think has really changed me ever since from coming out of that dark place, and now I'm back in it, hello, is when grief shows up at my door, I don't have to kick it out. I can just give it another pillow to sit Shiva with me on. And so, I really hope, as always, I hope there was no condemnation or judgment or any kind of shame that you felt from where you're at. We're at where we're at, even if you're in this survival mode. Nobi, I can't handle this. I just need to get through this day. Amen. When you're ready, the space will always be open for you to invite grief in to sit with you. And if you're not there right now, I will pray that when it's safe and when it's time, that your heart will be open to it. But I just wanted to offer a new narrative on what grief can really be. It is scary. It is. There's a lot of unknowns around it, and there's a lot of pain there. But what's so beautiful about grief, when we acknowledge it and when we hold space for it, is we get to see that love really is stronger than death. Love is really more powerful than failure. And love really can return to you what you have lost. Because I love this statement. I think several authors I've read in my grief journey. Because at the edge of our memories of what we have lost is a little resurrection. Every time I remember my mom, every time I think about my grandmas and how much they've loved me, I'm bringing their presence back. I'm bringing their love back into the space. I'm recognizing that it's still accessible. And then I go and look in the mirror after the tears have completely disfigured my face. And I see that everything I thought I lost is now living within me in much more powerful and incredible ways. Grief brought me to sit on this podcast with you. Grief helped me to realize that I lost all of my maternal figures, and I'm not confident that any one of them ever felt like they had the full space to use their voice. And I could recognize from that grief that I do, and I can choose it. And there's still time and opportunity for me to do so. And my grief gave me the invite and the courage to actually follow through with it. And so I'll leave it there. I know this is another heavy episode, and maybe we can do some box breathing. We haven't done that in a little bit to round us out. But if you're good and you'd like to log off here, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for sitting here and showing me love in my dark place. I really hope that this podcast blesses you and helps you to feel seen and less alone in whatever you're going through or whatever loss you're holding. But We can do our box breathing for those who want it at the end of this. Again, I like to try and remember to do a grounding exercise so that it just helps us to reground ourselves and reorient ourselves with our environment, because it is a lot of heaviness I'm bringing to you. All right. So if you can find yourself in a place where you feel comfortable and you feel safe, maybe you're lying on your back or you're sitting on a couch or a seat. But if you can just kind of close your eyes and just start to envision a place where you feel joy, where there's something around you that just makes you smile. Once you have that vision in your brain, in your mind locked in, we're going to go ahead with the box breathing. And it's just on counts of 4. We inhale by expanding our belly for a count of 4. Then we hold for a count of 4. Then we exhale through our mouth and a count of 4 as well. And then we hold again for a count of 4 before inhaling again through our nose. And we'll do this for 4 times. All right? So keep that image of joy in your head. Here we go. Inhale. Hold. 2, 3. Exhale. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. 2 more times. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. Last one, inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. All right. Feel free to keep doing your deep breathing, and just to keep that vision in your mind one more time. And before you open your eyes, I just want you to say one thing you are grateful for, one thing that fills your heart with gratitude. It can be as simple and small or as big as you need it to be. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. All right. Well, my gratitude is I'm thankful that I showed up today. It's been a hard week. Didn't think I could do this episode, but here I am.
And you did it well. You did it
And so I'm grateful. I'm pretty sure it's going to be an hour, but amen.
Definitely.
Jesus. But I'm thankful. Thank you so much again, just for being here, listening, watching, and just showing me love again in my dark places. And I hope that I showed you some love in yours. Until the next time, see y'all.
How do I grieve? I guess I better